Should we all just become raccoons? I don't know why I said it that way. Raccoons. This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horrors, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with Andrew Sullivan about his new book, The Marigold. Andrew F. Sullivan is an author and self-described brutalist. His fiction and criticism have appeared in the National Post, Hazlitt, the Globe and Mail, the New Quarterly, Prism, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Longform, and other publications. His short story collection, All We Want Is Everything, and his debut novel, Waste, were both named Best Books of the Year by the Globe and Mail. He lives in Hamilton, Ontario. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Really excited to chat with you today and kind of dig into some spooky stuff, as that is what we do here.
That is our remit, indeed. I'm going to veer away from horror into sci-fi with an icebreaker. If you had a time machine, would you travel to the past or the future?
I think I would travel to the future, if only because traveling to the past, I'd be terrified of the machine breaking. And then not being able to reverse things.
So you think in the future you could just go to a repair shop?
Yeah, or at least some of my creature comforts would be there and there'd be things I was used to, or, just a new way of living. I think, traveling back to the past, in a lot of ways, life would be a lot harder. And the fact that despite knowing maybe what's coming, being one man in the machine of history may not be enough to change it. And so you end up being this haunted Cassandra figure who no one listens to and, possibly instantly institutionalized.
That question illustrates the way your mind works in a beautiful way, because your first question was logistics in case of a worst case scenario.
You get a list of shit to do at the end of the day, objectives that have to be achieved.
Another interesting peek into your mindset. Someone hands you a time machine and you're like, oh, God, first I got to get it washed, and then I got to make sure it's parked in a safe place, and then I got to get spare parts. Wow, man. What about the joy of it? Yeah. What about just seeing all the mutants and the super viruses that are raging in the future? The killer robots?
Yeah, there's many ways where, like, Back to the Future is a horror movie.
Well, with all that said, I feel like that's it. Interview's over. I feel like I know everything I need to know about you.
You solved me.
I've solved you. Okay. Can you tell us a bit about yourself in regards to your origin story? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a town called Oshawa. It's in Ontario. It is a car manufacturing town, or it was. It's on Lake Ontario. It's very Midwest. It has a lot in common with the American Midwest, with, Detroit, Cleveland, places like that. It sort of was, like a very blue collar town to grow up in. When I was a teenager, we moved out more to the suburbs, but it was the edge of urban sprawl. Like, you walk outside and you see like corn across the street, almost, like very much the edge of expansion. And then I got out of there, went to school, did a lot of work in warehouses, manual labor, that kind of thing. Got lucky to get scholarship to University of Toronto to do a master's, which had some creative writing in it, where I got to work with some writers. I got to live in the city, started, writing and meeting a lot of writers and experiencing that world. But I'd been reading my whole life, and books had always been part of everything I did. And I used to read even when I was in the warehouse. I wait for the machines to break down and like hide and go read a book or something. Sometimes you'd have guys too who'd be like, "What are you doing reading, college boy?" And I'd have to be like, "Well, if you don't know how, I can teach you." I've always had a job, even when I've been writing fiction. That's just the reality of life for like most people, even if they don't talk about it. But writing has always had that outlet. It's always kind of given me a way to like not let my job, my day jobs define me or make me feel like I'm trapped. I think people do deserve a creative outlet, and it can kind of keep you from going to a dark place when maybe the rest of your life is a bit harsher. That was kind of where I was coming from with a lot of my writing career, but it really did start, back in Oshawa, rewriting like Jurassic Park to kill off my friends at recess.
There's the time travel aspect again. What do you think oriented you towards horror fiction as you got to school?
I mean, I was already probably on there with like Stephen King when I was younger, right? Because I mean, King had worked jobs and kind of lived that life. And at that time, he's very good at capturing a life in like 2 pages. People having to deal with mundane shit like paying their rent or getting a divorce while there's a monster hunting their children. And that felt very real to me. Life goes on even as horrible things are happening. I was already writing way before I got in these programs, but what they offered me was like time to read and to write, but also just time to create. I guess the thing writers need most: time to fuck up, time to write bad fiction, time to write bad stories, time to write obvious stories, to get them out, to, practice and to fail. And that was really important for me. And then a lot of the writers I was getting into, I was sort of combining, literary writers that I was running into who were still writing, like Flannery O'Connor and like Harry Crews are writing Southern grotesques that are often just as bleak or dark as, dark fiction, but seeing, different ways of storytelling structurally, different ways of like conveying those kind of emotions that you want to bring out of your reader. I think I learned a lot of that. I also learned, what made or what felt unique to me about my work and what I wanted to keep. That's really helpful for writers deciding what you want to keep and what you can get rid of for yourself.
Is that part of why you call yourself a brutalist?
That was more of a joke, I guess.
I know it's tongue-in-cheek, however, it does speak to a certain style or a certain approach to building
right. You're
story.
100% right, Jeff. It's a good question. It is a good question. I put that there kind of like, my first novel came out and there, I was getting reviews that were like, this is the most violent man in Canadian literature, whatever. And I'm like, it's, like it was shit like that, where it's like, and I do like, my style is very stark. Like it's abrupt, it's clipped at times, but then it'll switch to, a 69-word sentence. Like it can be sometimes punishing for some readers, I guess, in some ways. So I do, it presents sort of like, here's this thing you have to confront. It's a little confrontational in that way. And I think brutalist architecture kind of operates in that way. It is also like, this is what it's made of. It's made of words. It's made of like, this is what it's built from. Mm-hmm. And you're going to interact with that immediately.
The structure is visible and it is important.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, you're right. Like that is, it is intentional. It is tongue in cheek, but it is this idea of like, this is what you're getting. If you come to my fiction, I'm not giving you somebody to root for necessarily. I don't care if my characters are really relatable, but you can see the kind of story I'm telling. I'm not trying to pull a trick on you. It is apparent. You're right. Like function and seeing what the pieces are. So yeah, no, that is a great question. And it is kind of how I've over time become more comfortable just writing the kind of books I want to write. That's kind of where I've ended up with this one.
Can we dig a little deeper into your writing process in general?
I think ideas are important for me as a writer and for, creating the work I want, but I also like, they're not sacred to me. The work is applying those ideas and building something out of them. For me, when I do get into a project, if it's like a novel, I do get serious about it. I'm hitting it 5 days a week. I'm not a writing every day person. Like even if you're hitting it 5 days a week, I think weekends off is good. One of my mentors, Miriam Taves, who's this Canadian writer, her novel Women Talking got made into a movie and just won an Oscar or whatever else. But like back in the day when we were working together, Miriam was like, you don't have to write every day. You don't have to do all this bullshit, but you do have to think about it once a day. Life happens. You have your family, you have your other jobs, you have other things going on. Don't punish yourself because you didn't get 500 words that day. It's not helpful. It's not useful. It turns it into like a really sick obligation. And then when you do have time to write, take advantage of it, because the reality is like for me, when I'm writing a novel, I work a professional job, like 40, 50 hours a week. I have my friends, I have my family, I have my dog. So when I have time to write, I take it. Because if you don't, it just doesn't get done. I work a lot with a good friend of mine is a tattoo artist. And every day he has to go in, when he's working, so 5 days a week, he has to go in, he has to make art. That's how he's making his living every day. Some days he's hungover, or some days, he's not feeling it, or well, he's still got to go in. And literally the work has to get done. Like if you want a back piece, you don't just get one. It's months and months and months of work, but that's the only way you'll ever get it.
This is a good transition into talking about what tattoos mean to you.
I think I was getting frustrated with my creative career, and it was a way for me to kind of control that a bit. It was a way for me to like express myself while still like writing and doing other things, but to see something kind of manifest in that process. And I just was really lucky that, the guy I mainly work with, Franz Stefanik, is a really thoughtful guy, a really wide thinker and media guy and whatever else, and sort of just learning from him and talking with him about, the stories we like and the movies we like and the other things like that, sort of informing, a larger life built of other people's stories. When you go to the pain spa, as you might put it, you kind of, you reckon with yourself a little bit too, and you kind of get to know yourself better and what your limits are and where you can go. And that was good for me. I think it grounded me. I think it kept me aware of not being so precious about my writing career, in quotes.
You have a pretty big back piece, right?
We're not done yet, but yeah, we're working on it. Yeah.
This is something that you help create and collaborate on, and you experience it, but you never see it. So it's a part of you, but maybe not something like your sleeves that you can look down at and sort of be like, oh yeah, this has this meaning to me, or this is a reminder that is symbolic to me. What is it like altering a part of yourself that you can't see?
That is a good question to put out there. I think for me, it is knowledge that I have that maybe other people don't have about myself. It's to, let part of myself kind of be a canvas that I don't need to reckon with. I mean, same thing for even my legs. I don't, usually look at those very much. But the back is sort of a large, sort of singular piece, a beast of revelation coming up out of the ocean, a sort of end of things, a renewal of things, but also, a warning. I do sort of have a mind for calamity. I don't know, order and community and other things are very tenuous, and they really require our participation. Not to forget like how close you always are to, things being out of your control. Yeah, to kind of carry that with me. If I'm broke or destitute or shattered on the wheel, at least I'll still have whatever's been pounded into my back.
You'll always have a masterpiece with you.
Yeah, they can't take that from you, or if they do, you probably aren't living through it. So I think there's a part of that too. This goes away when I go away, but otherwise it does belong to me in a way that a possession can't really, like a car or even a book or a song can't quite be carried in the same way.
If I could get Bleak, and I know you love it because that's your fucking jam.
That's my street. Yeah.
Just to confront my own deepest fear, even if you lose your mind, you're still going to have that back piece. Everything that you are, your personality and all your memories could get annihilated and you'd still have that fucking back piece. That's wild.
Yeah, unless you like have a really bad run-in with a cheese grater.
Or you go down a really hot slide in the summer.
Exactly. But no, you're right. Reckoning with being a human being, that you are like a physical thing. I think it is something that does ground me a bit. Your body is definitely part of you, but it also can undermine you in ways you didn't expect. And maybe that's just aging. Eventually, that's number one killer, right?
That's right. Undefeated.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, the scoreboard is very clear.
Yeah.
The playoffs are over. There's no second season. There's no Champions League. It's done. But why not have fun during the process? My work's bleak. I sometimes have a bleak outlook in my fiction, but I also think sometimes that's like directing those things into my fiction. So in my day-to-day life, I'm maybe a bit more pleasant to be around.
Just because it's bleak doesn't mean it can't be fun.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Thank you. Yeah.
In recapitulating this origin story part of the interview, it seems to me that you are not drawn to horror as a genre necessarily. You were drawn to things that are bleak.
Yeah.
That has an overlap with horror, but not necessarily.
Yeah, I think I love horror and I enjoy it, and I read a lot of it, but I read a lot of other things too.
Do you know fellow author and past guest Jessica Peter?
Yes. I live in the lower city. Jess lives on the mountain. My wife and I will go out to dinner with Jess and her husband, and Jess very much is a very good food and beer knower of the city. I trust her opinions on many things. I think Jess has really been a good person for me to know in Hamilton and is super supportive and friendly and kind, which is, not always something you get when you move to a new city.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking with her, and she sang C'est l'Halloween for us.
Amazing.
It quickly became one of my new favorite songs. I listened to C'est l'Halloween so many times after that.
That's so cool. Yeah, Jess is great.
Why don't we get into your new book, The Marigold?
Sounds great. Yeah.
If I were to summarize it, I would say The Marigold is a novel about a city eating itself metaphorically and literally. I'm going to ask you to do the hard work of summarizing it because I know you had to write copy for the back of the book.
It is funny because there are some reviews out there, where they're like, whoever made this cover and wrote this copy, like, tricked me because this book was marketed really well at me, but I didn't like it. And I'm like, I wrote the copy, man. Like if you're mad at anybody,
Zing, got him.
It's still me. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a novel about a sentient mold moving through the city that speaks to people through their drains and kind of moves through the infrastructure. And that's part of, a near future space where climate change has kind of started to erode what we think of as permanent, which is cities, but they're not. They're ephemeral, they fall apart. And it's the story of this tower, the Marigold, and this fungus sort of moving through it like a sickness. And the people who live within it, often we check in with them and see them confronting this fungus, which I call the wet. But the story itself circles around 4 different sort of protagonists who are each encountering the wet in their own way. We have Henrietta Breaks, who is a 13-year-old girl who has a friend stolen away from her by some kind of physical manifestation of the wet, who brings his friend down into the sewers, down through a sinkhole, and she and her friends have to go find him. We have Soda, who is this, rideshare driver who, it accidentally ends up with the proof that there's something sinister going on with these buildings and it might be related to the wet, and he accidentally ends up with somebody's USB drive. We have Kathy Jin, who is a public, safety inspector who has met the wet, knows what it is, and, wants to try and use that to her advantage to get rid of it, but also maybe to escape her job and her life. And then finally, we have Stanley Marigold, whose father created the Marigold and who has set his son up to create Marigold 2, this other tower across the street. And so they're all kind of each on their own quest to confront the wet, but what they're actually confronting is the fact that they're each just a person trapped in a larger system that they can't actually control.
In the book, there are sinkholes that are swallowing parts of the city, and nobody blinks an eye. They've all acclimated to the fact that, sinkholes are opening up. That same attitude is applied to a dozen other factors that are spreading misery, that are actively destroying the city in real time. You have managed to strike a nerve for me that horror usually doesn't. I'm so used to horror being that thing from beyond. It seems to me that your horror is the monstrous thing that we've all agreed upon, we've all accepted, we shrug and move on. And that is like so much more monstrous. It's not dystopic because it is realistic. It does kind of shine a light on reality.
Yeah, with, a reality we don't maybe want to look at. One of my early books were like, oh, he's so violent, or I'm like, no, like 3 people died in that other book, but I make you look at it. Like, this guy doesn't just die in the woods and no one hears about it. Like, no, you stay with him until he's done. And that is uncomfortable. And that is, that is dread for me. And I do want my horror to feel lived in.
I can see the references or the comparisons to cosmic horror. One of the invading hostile forces is this mold that comes out of the earth. I've heard you say elsewhere, like, it's cosmic horror, but it comes from the ground. Well, Earth is part of the cosmos. If something bubbles up out of the earth, like, it is cosmic horror, right?
Yeah, you got me, man.
Yeah.
Dropping space knowledge on me.
Yeah,
no,
a lot of
good.
people don't think of it that way. And
Yeah.
you might think that, oh, it's this surreal forces that are crushing these ordinary people, but that's not this heightened thing in 11. I mean, you're talking about capitalism. You're talking about,
Yeah.
late stage capitalism. And you're talking about
Yeah.
climate change. And it may not be to the point where it is in the Marigold yet, but these are these slow moving, seemingly inevitable walls of the vice that are closing down upon us. Today in America, we celebrated our 200th mass shooting of 2023. And that's just another example of these things that we have just accepted. It's just an impersonal force that is killing and grinding us down. What are you going to do? I still have to go to work in the morning, right?
Yeah, man. It is that sort of relentless pressure. The forces you're talking about are definitely in the Marigold and very present, and they are, to me, horrifying.
You've got climate change or rampant nature, and you have late stage capitalism. You've got the gig workers and the civil servants in the middle. What is the middle path? There's no return to nature because there's no salvation to be had in natural existence when the environment is unforgiving and unconcerned with what you want. And there's no appeal to technocratic, governmental, civic, organizational solution. What do you want your characters to do to make it through?
I mean, I don't really. It's a horror novel for me. Like, this is like, I don't necessarily have an out for them. Jeff Vandermeer recently, he had a really great, long, thoughtful essay about climate fiction called Climate Fiction Won't Save Us, because, readers are kind of looking to like, oh, well, what would we do and how would we survive, or what would our next hope be? And like, I don't see books as necessarily like a method for change or for like responsible behavior or hope or anything like that. I'm not Ligotti here, but I do think I'm a bleak writer, but I do leave open endings for some of those characters because I am not for the annihilation of all things. There are moments of human kindness and compassion between characters and between people, and I do think that is often where we build solidarity with each other. I do think like solidarity between workers, between families, between people, that's sort of, to me, the root of where positive change or positive outcomes come from. And that is also why I do talk about, like, for the Marigold, it is about the fragility of that.
The wet, even when it embodies certain human characteristics, it still functions like a mold.
Yeah.
It is searching out weak points, places where it can infiltrate, colonize, and consume. It's natural, but it is only really concerned with human weakness and frailty so that it can feed and grow. Stanley Marigold and his cabal of real estate developers are similarly trying to capitalize on people who are aspiring to live in a more glitzy place and have some status. They're not going after the ultra rich. They're going after poor people who they can keep in slums or would-be rich people, these influencers that you sprinkle throughout the book, like video game streamers, porn streamers, athletes, all of whom have these very brief careers that are self-destructive and quickly fading. And you drop them in these little Stephen King style bite-sized biographies to give you an idea of who is living in a place like the Marigold.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great description of it, man. I think that was the intention, that's the structure, that's the style for it, is to quickly sort of orient yourself with, what is this place and who are the victims and what is the wet taking and do have value, but they have been sort of discarded or they've been sort of placed in a place where all that's wanted from them is sort of their output. And the same thing goes, and it transfers to people like Soda as well, who's, it's like where you become sort of a commodity. And for the wet and for Marigold, both, right? That humanity has sort of been translated into a resource that can be extracted.
And for Threshold, to a lesser extent, which is sort of embodied in something like the rideshare company that Soda works for.
Yeah, exactly.
He is just a human asset.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the most direct one for sure. And Threshold is part of that too. And that's why it is like it's this novel of these competing forces, right? Who all kind of want the same resource, which is people. they don't really have a plan for what happens after that. It's about accumulation. It's a competition with sort of a zero-sum game to them.
There's this phenomenon in New York and other major cities where developers have been building these huge luxury apartments that are never occupied because they are assets for the ultra rich and they're ways to launder money.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't yet had to run into a real like, oh, so you don't want us to build housing for people? Like, it's like, no, like, let's talk about what's really being built. And you just summed it up great. Like, that's a perfect description of how these things are done. ROI, right, ends up being the name of the game and the name of a different version of the wet that has no conception of humanity.
Do you take it as a failure or as a victory that the only character in your book that people really love and rally around is a shambling mold corpse named Cabeza?
I love it. The best outcome for this book is a Cabeza fan club.
Cabeza plushies, Cabeza chia pets.
I like it to, or they or whatever, to exist as people want to imagine. I wouldn't want a plushie to fully define it for someone. I would love to see all the variations people come up with. I don't think there would ever be a singular one because it does change throughout the story. But Cabeza as, an entity that wants to help, that wants to explain, that wants to find peace and to kind of be restored in a new way and not go backward, but go forward and become whatever Cabeza is going to be in the end.
But there is no legacy. There is nothing that will outlive you. The cities themselves will crumble.
Yes.
Even if everything else is arraigned against you and entropy ultimately is going to wipe everything away. That doesn't erase your obligation to be good to one another now.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to put it. And I think that sort of underpins some of my thinking with the Marigold. Oh, we're digging into it today, Eddie.
Yeah. It's a great button on the Marigold, and we are running along, so I'm going to skip my usual Halloweeny stuff because I want to talk about what's next.
Yeah.
What are you working on next?
So, this is exciting. Yeah, it's a crazy year. I have a book coming out in August with my friend Nick Cutter. I've been friends with him for about 10 years through writing in Toronto. He's a really generous guy, very much a guy who knows horror. He's the guy who read every single horror novel published from like 1950 through 1995, and often 2 or 3 times, even if he didn't like it. We have this book coming out called The Handyman Method, which is about a sort of haunted DIY home improvement YouTube channel that ruins a man's life. It is kind of Amityville Horror meets Black Mirror, but the Black Mirror episodes that are actually scary, not what about cell phone, but too much. The ones that do kind of dig into like, what is the personal costs of, surrendering to that kind of algorithmic possession. I think we've all been in a place where, you're trying to watch a YouTube video about a Waylon Jennings song and 3 videos later, it's like Ben Shapiro or fucking Alex Jones. You're going down these deep holes of insane content that you never asked for. And sort of, and YouTube itself is even like, well, we're not really sure how, they can pull some levers and there are some methods, but like the reality is, we've built machines we don't even really understand. And so that's what the Handyman Method is about. It's about a lot of other stuff, but it was a really fun book to write. We co-wrote it, started out as a short story, and it does get gross with the body horror. It does get mean. It is a book about a guy who is not a good man. It is, kind of in that tradition of The House Next Door and stuff like The Shining and other things, because, how are you going to write a haunted house novel in 2023 that doesn't? It is in a lineage of other horror novels that we're talking about the haunted house now and the forces that you invite in, maybe not through the front door, but through a scream. And also the desperation for like a lot of men to be taken seriously as like someone who can take care of their own place. I think it's also a fun book. Like you can.
It sounds fun.
Like we just went off on it. Like we just go off. Like it really is a novel that is was fun to write, was written thoughtfully, but was also us just like
egging each other on.
Yeah, you're egging each other on. You're kind of like, all right, like let's amp it up. I mean, Nick is one of the most sort of. If you've read The Troop, like he's the sicko mastermind out there.
When does the Handyman Method come out?
August 8th, so it's coming up, man. It's hurtling toward us.
Well, maybe we can hold that back for another episode. That'd be really cool.
Your questions have been, this is very, like, we've been diving deep. You've been really pushing me. So I'm happy to talk about Handyman another time as well. So.
Cool, because I'm already hooked. Like, as a companion piece or just as a follow-up to the Marigold.
Yeah.
Where can our listeners find you online?
I'm semi-active on like Instagram at AF Sully, so AFSULLI. Same thing on Twitter, where you will see my bread dog and stuff about my books. Yeah, that's where I am. I'm got a website as well, andrewfsullivan.com. And you try to do like, oh, AF Sullivan, and everyone just was like, well, what does it stand for? And then you're just
As fuck. As fuck Sullivan. Bleak as fuck Sullivan.
yeah, there you go.
You are fucking crushing it with promotion for this book. It seems like you're getting a lot of love, a lot of hometown love.
Yeah, I think, but it can also, like, if you don't catch it, it's so small that then it just never happens. All that stuff is ephemeral. I'm happy those things happen, but I also know how rare they are and how wispy they are. They disappear, Eventually you just have the book at the end and all that stuff goes away. And I've seen it happen to my friends. I've seen it happen with past books. You definitely enjoy it and you hope it spreads. And that's the biggest thing, is that people learn that your book exists.
Right.
And then that hopefully they have the time to engage with it. These kind of conversations for a book like The Marigold offer a way in too, where it's like, well, what's this book about? Well, it's about all these things. And like, if you're into those kind of things, you want to explore them, dive in, but it may not be for you. And so these kind of conversations are actually really helpful. And that's kind of part of what's built it up, is that my editor was like, we need to get this arc out early. We need to have people actually read this book and engage with the ideas, because otherwise it'll just be like, oh, it's a weird fungus tower book. Ugh. And then it's done and gone. It's being lucky there. It's also, even though I didn't have a book for 7 years, I've still been in my writing communities. I've still been supporting people. I've still been there. And that does matter to people.
Well, thank you for hanging out and diving into the Marigold with me today and all things Bleak as fuck Sullivan.
Thanks, Jeff.
My pleasure. All right, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you later, man.
Subscribe and follow the show. Links are in the show notes. You can find Ryan at 20th Century RG with the number 20 on YouTube. And you can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.